Hey guys, this is the solutions video for the practice FRQ that I left you for monetary policy in the money market. So notice this is a short free response. It's an actual short free response from a AP exam, a released AP exam. So notice that the first part said that there's a decrease in the demand for M1 money because people are using credit cards more for transactions. So part A says just draw the money market graph and show the impact of this on your graph. Make sure not only are you drawing it, but you've got everything labeled correctly as well. For the M1 money market graph, you're going to have nominal interest rate on your y-axis. You're going to have the quantity of money on your x-axis. You're going to have a downward sloping money demand curve, and you're going to have a vertical money supply curve because remember the M1 money supply is going to be set by the Federal Reserve. Now where those two hit, just draw a dashed line over. That's going to be your starting interest rate, your starting nominal interest rate. You can do IR1 if you want to call it that. Now, since the question says that people are using credit cards more for transactions and that their demand for this money is going to be decreasing, then we're just going to decrease the demand curve on our graph. So shift your money demand curve on your graph to the left, and notice when you do this, it's going to result in a lower nominal interest rate. Now, what you want to do at that new intersection point, you want to draw a little dashed line over to your y-axis, and you want to label that IR2 and draw an arrow going down. By drawing that arrow and labeling it IR2 versus IR1, you're showing anybody that looks at that graph exactly what happened to the nominal interest rate as a result of your money demand curve decreasing or shifting to the left. Now part B says, given the interest rate shown on your graph in part A, the nominal interest rate decrease, how is that going to affect bond prices in the short run? Remember that we said that there is an inverse relationship between bond prices and interest rates. If people can't get a bond with a very good interest rate now, maybe you have a bond that's got like a 7% interest rate of return, and they can only get a bond that's like 3% interest rate of return. If the interest rates have gone down, that means that I'm going to be able to sell my 7%, my very rewarding bond, for a higher price. Because I'm going to tell everybody else, hey, you want to buy a bond? Well, look, you can't get anything worth any value now, but I got this 7% interest rate bond. It has a higher rate of return. I'll sell it to you, but for a higher price. So remember that when interest rates go down and people can't get bonds that are really worth anything anymore, that means that people can sell their previously owned bonds for a lot more money because they have more value, a higher rate of return. So when interest rates go down, bond prices that I can sell my old bonds for, they're going to increase. Bond prices and interest rates are inversely related. Part C says, given the interest rate change that you showed in Part A, the nominal interest rate falling, how is that going to affect price level in the short run? Now remember that price level is going to be what's on the y-axis of our aggregate supply, aggregate demand model. Now you can show this on a graph if you want to, or notice that you can just state what's going to happen to it, and then you have to also go through and explain. If you wanted to draw a graph, you would just draw your aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, have price level on the y-axis and real GDP on your x-axis, draw your snowflake. Aggregate demand would be downward sloping, short run aggregate supply would be upward sloping, long run aggregate supply could go just right down the middle at full employment. Whenever interest rates go down, here's the link up, here's the chain of events. Nominal interest rates go down, which means that it's more affordable to go to the bank and get loans. Loans are cheaper. So I increases and C increases, which are both major components of aggregate demand. That's going to shift aggregate demand to the right. And when aggregate demand shifts to the right, that's going to not only increase your price level, but increase your real GDP and also decrease unemployment. So you could simply say price level would increase, and your explanation would be an increase in nominal interest rates leads to an increase in I, business investment, and C, consumer spending, which means that aggregate demand would shift to the right, and when aggregate demand shifts to the right, price level goes up. You could write it out like that, and that would link up the money market graph to the aggregate supply, aggregate demand graph. For good measure, you could also just sketch your aggregate supply, aggregate demand model graph, which only takes a couple of seconds, and you can actually show your aggregate demand shifting to the right, and you could show on your y-axis with labeling and arrows that the price level is most definitely increasing. Finally, Part D says, what is going to be an open market operation that the Federal Reserve could use basically to counteract or offset that decrease in demand for money on the money market graph? Now, when the demand for money shifted to the left, that put pressure on nominal interest rates to fall. What could the Federal Reserve do with buying and selling bonds, with open market operations, to counter that drop in nominal interest rates, to offset that drop in nominal interest rates? Well, offsetting a drop would be trying to increase something. If the Federal Reserve is trying to keep the nominal interest rate up, then they would decrease the money supply. To decrease the money supply using open market operations, then we know that they're going to sell bonds because selling makes the money supply smaller. And when the money supply decreases and goes to the left, when that vertical line shifts to the left, that is going to help keep those nominal interest rates up. So your answer here could simply be that the Federal Reserve would want to sell bonds. Please make sure your answer includes something with bonds because it specifically mentioned open market operations. So your answer has to include either buying or selling bonds. The Federal Reserve is going to sell bonds, which would decrease the money supply, which would help to restore nominal interest rates back to their original level before money demand fell. And there you have it, guys. So sometimes monetary policy and the money market graph, they're parts of the long free response question, but sometimes they could be standalones on a short free response question like we have right here.